The small diner on the corner of Elm Street and Rosewood Avenue wasn't much to look at. But for Anika, it was her second home. The flickering neon sign outside that read Rosie's Diner might have turned away passers-by. But inside, the smell of sizzling bacon and freshly brewed coffee greeted anyone who entered. Anika had been working there for 6 years, and while the pay wasn't great, she took pride in treating every customer like family. Known for her warm smile and an uncanny ability to sense when someone was having a rough day, Anika was a favorite among the regulars. She worked the early morning shifts, often arriving before sunrise to prep for the breakfast rush. Her boss, Mr. Caldwell, ran the diner with a strict hand, constantly reminding the staff to stick to the basics and avoid unnecessary distractions. To him, time was money, and every second Anika spent chatting with customers or offering extra napkins felt like a wasted opportunity. It was a Wednesday morning, just after the breakfast crowd had thinned out, when a man walked in. He wasn't the diner's usual type of customer. No work boots, no familiar face from the neighborhood. He was dressed in a sharp but wrinkled suit, his tie slightly askew. He looked out of place. But more than that, he looked lost. Anika watched him hesitate near the door, his eyes scanning the room before settling on a booth in the far corner. He moved slowly, as if carrying an invisible weight on his shoulders. Something about his demeanor caught her attention. Grabbing a menu, she approached his table. "Good morning, sir," she said warmly, placing the menu in front of him. "Can I get you started with some coffee?" The man looked up, his face tired and drawn. "Just water, please," he said softly, his voice barely audible. Anika nodded and returned moments later with a glass of water. "Take your time," she said gently. "If you need anything, just let me know." As she walked back to the counter, she caught Mr. Caldwell glaring at her. "Anika," he said sharply, his voice low but firm, "we don't have time for loiterers. If he's not ordering, he needs to leave." Her stomach tightened. She hated how Mr. Caldwell always judged people by appearances. "He's just deciding," she said calmly, keeping her voice steady. "You've got tables to clean." Mr. Caldwell snapped. "Focus on paying customers." Anika turned away, biting her tongue. She hated confrontation, but something about the man's quiet demeanor made her feel like she couldn't ignore him. She knew what it was like to feel invisible, to have people look right through you. She wasn't about to do that to him. Over the next few minutes, she found small ways to show kindness. She refilled his water without being asked. When she saw him fiddling with his tie, she brought him a napkin and said, "Looks like you've had a rough morning. Let me know if you'd like something warm." The man gave her a faint smile, and for a moment, she thought she saw a glimmer of gratitude in his eyes. Eventually, he ordered a small breakfast, just toast and scrambled eggs, and ate in silence. Anika didn't pry, but she kept an eye on him, ready to help if needed. When he finished, he stood and reached into his pocket, only for his hand to come up empty. His face flushed with embarrassment as he muttered, I seem to have forgotten my wallet." Before Mr. Caldwell could notice, Anika stepped in. "It's okay," she said quickly. "I've got this one." The man's eyes widened. "I can't let you." "It's just eggs and toast," she said with a shrug, trying to make it sound casual. "Consider it a kindness." He stared at her for a long moment, searching for the right words. Finally, he said, "Thank you. Truly." Anika nodded and smiled, brushing it off like it was no big deal. But as the man left the diner, she felt Mr. Caldwell's eyes boring into her. She knew she was in trouble. "Anika," he said, his tone cold. "My office. Now." Anika followed him into his cramped office at the back of the diner. The walls were lined with faded photos and shelves crammed with old invoices. The room smelled faintly of stale coffee and frustration, a fitting backdrop for what she knew was coming. "What were you thinking? Giving that man a free meal?" Mr. Caldwell demanded, his voice sharp. "You know we can't afford to hand out charity here." Anika stood her ground, folding her arms. "He looked like he needed help," she said evenly. "It wasn't a big deal." "Not a big deal?" Mr. Caldwell's face turned red. "Do you think this place runs on good intentions? You're here to work, not play savior." Her cheeks flushed with anger, but she kept her voice steady. I don't see how a plate of eggs and toast is going to bankrupt the diner. That's not the point, Mr. Caldwell snapped, slamming his hand on the desk. You undermined me in front of a customer, and now you're arguing with me. If you can't follow the rules, maybe you don't belong here. The words hung in the air, suffocating and inescapable. Anika stared at him, her heart pounding. She thought about the years she'd spent working at the diner, the long hours, the difficult customers, the messes cleaned without complaint. All of it felt meaningless in this moment. Fine, she said quietly, swallowing the lump in her throat. If that's how you feel, I'll go. Mr. Caldwell blinked, clearly not expecting her to call his bluff. You're fired, he said after a pause. Pack up your things and leave. You can pick up your final paycheck at the end of the week. Anika nodded, refusing to let him see the tears welling in her eyes. She turned and walked out of the office, her head held high. The other staff watched her in stunned silence as she grabbed her bag and coat. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't need to. As she stepped outside into the crisp morning air, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. She'd lost her job over a simple act of kindness. Anger, sadness, and a quiet sense of resolve swirled within her. She had done what she believed was right, and no one could take that from her.